Namaste. This is Toksa Hour. I am Maggie Ross, and I am live from Porcupine, South Dakota, where or along Porcupine Creek, where of course you know the porcupines roam. Ah, it was a busy week, that's for sure. It's um, it's been busy. It's been hot. Like it was like 100 and something on Wednesday. That was really, really hot. Like it took my car all the way or to cool off, even though I, like started it, turned the AC on. It took the car all the way from Mission to, I want to say VTEL to start cooling off. And I think most of that is because I'm driving into the sun. I'm driving into the sun and the sun is beating down on me. But yeah, that was some intense heat. And then it's humid heat, so it's different. Humid heat is very different from dry heat. Like I'm okay in dry heat. Humid heat kind of takes my breath away. So this morning we are going to talk about censorship. We're going to talk about truth and Indigenous data sovereignty. We will be joined later by Joseph Yrecheta. He'll come back on and he's going to talk to us about DNA, Indigenous data sovereignty, control over genetic information as a modern front in Indigenous rights. So that's really a big thing. It's a big thing for us, and having a conversation about it. Like we talk about Indigenous rights here, but we should also be just talking about your rights as a person. So indigenously, yes. But if you're not indigenous, you should be concerned about your what is happening with your data, what is happening with your DNA, what is happening and what are they doing? Because we know that government and corporations are notorious for violating our rights. They're notorious for it. And a lot of times in when they're dealing with our private personal information, the government can do it, the corporations do it, but then what ends up happening is the corporations they get away with it because they are not government. And so government now puts everything over and says that um they have what would you say? Like they have so they have this, it's like the government, why am I having a loss for words? So the government has this ability to privately contract everything. And so in the private sector, corporations have more control or more able to not follow the rules versus the government, because the government is supposed to be open book. Excuse me, my phone is crazy. I have Joseph in the waiting room. So I just messaged him. I guess I could have said if he's watching. Anyways, so in the conversation of what happens with censorship, what does that look like? Censorship oftentimes is going to look like um, like they're going to restrict what can be said, where it can be said. They may block it and they may erase it. And so as Indigenous people, we are confronted with this. And right now, as Americans, we are facing censorship. We are, it's like really big. And it's been happening. Like people might right now say, oh, it's Donald Trump. But it's been happening. And Donald Trump is one person and he is backed by a million censorshippers. So what do we know that they're doing? They're banning books, they're rewriting history, they're deleting posts, or they simply leave certain stories out of the news cycle. And so there's a lot of things that are going on that are not even making the news. And sometimes journalists will take on this whole thing about saying, our newspapers will say, we don't want to cover those stories. We're just trying to focus on the positive stories. And the reason why they say that is because there's consequences to what they post. So if you're a small newspaper, you could lose your license, you can lose your readers, you can lose your advertisers. There's a lot of consequences in printing, doing investigative reporting and printing it. There is a lot of consequences for that. We face as Lakota people or Native people, we have faced for a very long time the erasure of history. African Americans, erasure of history. So they want to change the whole narrative. So we are no longer, they were no longer slaves. They were no longer human trafficked here. They become indentured servants. And then how else do they phrase it? They become indentured servants, and then they look at like the rules, they change all of it. And I always go back to when I'm killing flies. I always go back to this era of COVID and me reading my son's social studies curriculum, and he's 5th grade, and westward expansion, that the Native people had so much land, they just wanted to share it. And that's not even accurate. But the person on the other side of that, the Kristi Noems, the Donald Trumps, the Marco Rubios, the South Dakota State Legislature, probably Dusty Johnson, John Thune, Mike Rounds, like they all want to stay in that section where let's make it soft so we're not the villains in the story anymore. And so they wanted to share. And so that's the message. We're just sharing people. Forget that they brutalized us, they did us in that. I mean, even the Thanksgiving story is a erasure story, a change the narrative story. So Thanksgiving becomes about sharing a meal, generosity, harvest. And it's like this too. Like the natives were starving, so the pilgrims fed them. Yeah. So that's kind of how they do all of this. They're restructuring. So right before our eyes, they are restructuring. And we're all sitting here like, what the heck is this? How did this happen? That ain't true. And so when they restructure, it falls into this place of indoctrination. You know how they accuse the left of indoctrinating the in education? And so then they want to blame the left for LGBTQ plus two rights for the diversity in the workplace, because that diversity brings different thinking and different accountability. It's like you have to go and look. So instead, it was just a one-way um, serves all method to government and to business world and all of that. And now you have to like look, because you validate the people within your community, that who are you trying to provide a service to? So that all happens. And then we get into this big move of what's happening in social media, and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because we get into this place of what they call shadow banning. And I can remember last year, the year before, 2 years ago, whenever all this stuff started happening with Palestine, people were saying we're being shadow banned. And then they'd say it, and on TikTok, they would say banana. We're getting, shadow banana, because there's words you can't say. So see, in the TikTok world, there's a whole language. There's a whole language of what is happening in the world, in Palestine. We can't say free Palestine. Probably, I don't even know how YouTube feels about it, but you can't say it. I mean, you can say it in TikTok, but what's going to happen is your voice is going to be suppressed. You're going to get shadow banned. Your content may be removed because they have AI that look for specific things, keywords. And so that's one. Free Palestine is a word or statement. If you say ICE, that can be attentive. Israel can get their attention. So people, you can't even say dead, killed, murdered, thing. You can't say those. You can't say genocide on TikTok, Holocaust. You can't say terrorist. You have to use all this coding. So you have to say you can't even say Israeli or IDF. So on TikTok, they are known as the blueberries. It's really crazy. The G side. You can't say link in bio on TikTok anymore because of all of the people helping the Palestinians. So you have to say, change it around, switch it up. People will say Bink in Lio instead of link in bio. So there's all this crazy stuff that's going on with the silencing in social media. And it's even worse in Facebook. Zuckerberg is in all kinds of agreements with his Meta platform and surveillance that he's in agreement with Israel. And a lot of people still over there on Facebook, giving him clout. You're being surveillance like to the max. And you are also like, if nobody's seeing your post, it's because you're shadow banned. You are not getting anything out. So it's like they're conditioning all of us to say, like, we can't say this, or that. So this is the only thing that we can say. And so in the only thing we can say, all we can talk about is maybe cupcakes, baking, cooking, things like that. But once you're shadow banned, it's really hard. Like they hold that against you forever. So in the TikTok world, we just create language. We just create a secondary language to get through, to communicate with each other. And we all know, and we're all saying them in real life too. We'll talk about being shadow banana, or we'll talk about being, about the unaliving that's happening. We use all of the language, and we all understand each other too, just in everyday language. I had someone talking to me in person about the blueberries, and I knew what they were talking about. And so it's like that stuff that's happening to us. And we don't know. And we don't, I mean, We don't know because we don't see it and we don't hear it. So that's like the big thing. You'll have like the media, they're gatekeepers. They'll decide on who's the artist, what culture. They'll block the narratives. So it's really hard. Like even if you go up to Rapid City, they have that graffiti alley. A lot of talented people. They control the market up there in Rapid. What native artists are going to be promoted? And I know this because I have a friend and his name is Joe Pulliam. And Joe Pulliam speaks out. He uses his voice, and so everybody suppresses him because they don't like what he says. And so he has a hard life. I mean, he had a gallery. He had a native owned art gallery on Main Street in Rapid City. And because of how he used his voice, speaking out, trying to promote local Indigenous peoples like that, that's what happened to him. And so his gallery went down, and now he's just trying to figure it out again, like how he's going to survive. And so that's what they do, the gatekeepers. And we have our own people that are gatekeepers. We have our very own people, and you might recognize them because they're the ones that will put out the responses. They will be the one that's right away trying to get, like the flying monkey thing, go over there and get all the support to attack them. So we have our own gatekeepers. We don't need the federal government to gatekeep because they taught people how to do that here locally, and that's what they do. So then we get into your workplace pressure. So now they dox you. So you say something, like if I say something, they're going to go after me. You see a lot of journalists, American journalists, commentators that have lost their jobs from these media sites because of the words that they spoke against. They spoke against Trump. They spoke against Israel. They're speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people, the children. Some of them oppose the what's going on with the Epstein files, all of that. And so those guys all slowly, boom, 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 they lose their jobs. You'll see where they'll even start giving them less showtime, airtime, because they need to stifle that voice. We don't want that out there. We want hunky-dory. So everybody believes that we're living in a hunky-dory world when it isn't. And so the workplace pressures, they'll hunt us all down and start trying to come after our jobs. And I've had personal experience with that. I've lost everything before, many times because of my voice. And so now I'm just a little bit smarter about it. So I see it coming. So I just started eliminating things. Get rid of it. Don't need it. So then I don't have to worry about it. If I have to just live in my house with no electricity, I guess that's what will happen. So I'll give you an example, and then we'll move on. Joseph Yrecheta is in the admit room or in the waiting room, so I want to bring him on. But when we think about what is happening right now, many people do not know that there are protests going on, protests against ICE. So I want to give you a real-time example of what censorship looks like, not from a history book, but happening right now. We have protests that are taking place in Los Angeles, Portland, and New York over ICE and detentions. People are in the streets. This is crazy. Like, I'm watching videos of people in the streets. There's like hundreds of thousands of people. They're chanting, holding signs. Some are live streaming, but live streaming is really hard because they are shadow banning people. They're removing content. This is really serious business. I think the only place right now that isn't doing serious censorship is X, the platform X. But if you turn to the mainstream news, you're not hearing about it. You don't hear about it. We're not hearing about it. It's not accident. It's not. They're doing it on purpose because they don't want you to know. So when something is happening in multiple cities across the country, and the only way to see it is through independent media or someone's live stream, that's censorship in action. It's about controlling what we notice. Because if we don't know what's happening, we can't respond and can't organize, and we can't stand in solidarity. So, example, go back to Facebook, 2016. We're in the midst of Standing Rock, Mini-Wachoni. That is trending. Facebook says we're going to start listing what's trending on Facebook. That was number 1, 2, 3, and 4 every day. And then you had other things down there on trending. Millions of people watching that and being informed. So within 6 months or so, trending was no longer a thing in Facebook. They took it down because they didn't want people to know. So they had to figure out a way to do that. So you don't see trending anymore. What's trending on these platforms? Because of this is why, like in Gaza, all those journalists, they have their press jackets on, but they're suppressed. Nobody's hearing their reports. Nobody's hearing their news. Nobody's picking up on it. And this one guy says, because he was in one of those contracting things for the, what was it, Gaza Health Foundation or something like that, Feed Gaza Foundation. I don't know. Anyways, it was an Israel thing, Israel American nonprofit. And he's talking about how when people are allowed in, it's worse. It's worse than Germany. What the Germans did to the Jewish people during World War II, it's worse than that. That's what he says. But none of us see it because they don't let media in. They don't let journalists in. And Israel targets all the journalists and doctors because the doctors report the death numbers. But we don't know because nobody's telling us. So we just turn on our TV and, oh, there it is. Yeah, everything's good. Looks like we're going to get rain today. Yeah, so this stuff is crazy. So we always want to make sure that we are speaking truth. We are being like we speak from a place where we uplift and empower people, and we take responsibility for what we're presenting. And so that's what I try to do here. Give that opportunity. So, I want to transition us now. Joseph is now joining us. Joseph Yrecheta. He is coming live from Eagle Butte, South Dakota. Or I don't know. Are you in Eagle Butte or are you just on the Cheyenne River Res? You're muted.
Yeah, just on the Cheyenne River Res. Yep.
Yeah, he's on the res. He's on one of the reses. Every time when I think about that, I think of the 1980s and I'm driving with some friends and we're going across the state to Sioux Falls and we're listening to Dwight Yoakam and it's a cassette tape. And at the end of that cassette tape, he says, "What Indian reservation am I on anyways?" When I say the res, I always think of that. That was just crazy. I was like, what did I hear? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Up in arms. Up in arms. It's really I'm bothered. I'm bothered by all the censorship. I'm bothered by the control. I'm bothered by all of this, and it's just real frustrating because we can't, it seems like we can't collectively come together. We can't be in solidarity because none of us know. They're purposely keeping information from us.
Yeah, and some of it's our responsibility as tribal leaders, tribal scholars, tribal elders. We need to figure out, or have, for a while had to figure out how to get around their propaganda.
So Joseph, are you still with the bio data? What is your organization? The bio,
Yeah, so I'm the executive director and vice president of the Native Biodata Consortium, which that is in Eagle Butte. So that's where the office is and the labs are. And we've been in existence since 2018. We would love to have tribes have a business code that we can apply for a license and all that. But we had to apply for a license through the state of South Dakota, and then later we had to get our nonprofit status through the federal Internal Revenue Service in 2019. But that's another issue of tribes like, the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois Confederacy. They created a whole system where they can give out their own passports, driver's licenses, all that. I wish that all tribes could do that, so that we have an extra layer of protection. Instead of relying on state or federal authority, we're relying on tribal sovereignty.
that would be something. I've been saying that about how we, as Indigenous people, we don't stand on our own sovereignty. Our tribes don't do it. I was just having this conversation with a former president of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. Like, here we are, like, I think it's Tennessee. I think it's Tennessee that just passed a law that says that AI, anyways, they're protecting their citizens of their state, saying that all citizens of their state have they control their own facial images, their voices, and their content. So AI can't take it. And so I was saying that I'm like, our tribes aren't even doing that. Like, our tribes aren't even getting involved at this level because they're too busy micromanaging their tribal programs, that they don't get involved at these bigger levels and saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to do that here. So if you're running AI here, so like Starlink, you're running AI, Elon Musk, you're not going to be able to do that here. So this is our law, and this is how we're protecting our people. And so if you violate it, there's going to be consequences for you. Anyways, I think I'm too ahead of myself.
No, there's some tribes out there doing it. The Pueblo tribes are doing it. I know tribes in Canada have done it. They're both at the local level, the federal level, and the international level. I mean, these are all issues that are being brought up or have been brought up in the last 5 years at the United Nations. It's like, the people who are most vulnerable after the 2008 global market crash are Indigenous peoples, because to get out of that hole that they buried themselves in, they are coming to Indigenous spaces and taking Indigenous resources. And those resources aren't the regular resources we used to think about of gold and oil. Now it's water. Now it's botanical medicines. Now it's lithium, all of these rare earth minerals. Like 35% of the rare earth minerals in the United States are all on reservations, and not all reservations have rights that go from the surface of the land to the core of the earth, and from the surface of the land to outer space. Some tribes have sold those rights away or had them taken away, like the Navajo Nation. So the Navajo Nation had their uh, underground sovereignty taken away during World War II, when the fight was with the Germans and needing to get uranium out of the ground. So I think that tribes need to go and look back at all of their laws and provisions and change it back to sovereignty. They need to have sovereignty from the surface of the ground to the core of the earth, and from the surface of the ground to outer space.
I think that's real, I don't know, it's just real frustrating. And I think that Donald Trump just keeps us intentionally like this so that we're fighting each other, so that we can't see that stuff over there. And I think even like the Republican Party does that, and even the Democrats, like they want to keep us all distracted. And so we're over here doing all of these things, worried about all of these things, without just even stepping back and regrouping and saying, hey, as a tribal organization entity, we are responsible for people and we need to protect their rights. It's really odd.
Yeah, and there's a lot, like in this fight, tribes have a lot of latitude to do whatever they want because the relationship is to nation to nation. So if there's money out there, whether it's federal or private, and tribes want to collect data on global warming and climate change, then they can. And that's why I've been trying to tell tribes for the last 10 years. It's like you don't have to ask anybody's permission. You can collect the data that you think is important. You can do the things that you think is important. You can protect that data because the laws about open data and sharing of resources don't apply to tribes. You guys can make any rules you want to make about that stuff. And I think you should, because in times like this, when all of these states and all of these universities can't collect this information, tribes could rise, to prominence by doing the things that other people won't do because they don't want to act right, or they're, acting in fear, like these big companies like CBS and Paramount, or they can't do because of the laws. So I think now is the time for tribes to shine throughout the world, right?
You've been talking for some time in regards to like our DNA and even just the data in itself. And I did a show a couple weeks ago where I was talking about our data and our DNA and like how you had previously talked about the connection, like when I said about my blood pressure. And so you was talking to me about how they generalize and set and normalize the numbers for blood pressure. And then we had that conversation about arsenic. And so you were saying in our, according to our DNA or whatever, we have plains people have a high tolerance for arsenic. So that might be why we don't kill over from eating choke cherries. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so these adaptations that different human populations have mean all kinds of changes at the clinic, right? And there's not enough, even though this work's been out there at least since 1990, it's not getting into the medical schools. It's not being taught to the doctors that service tribes at the Indian Health Service or even 638 health systems. So I was at a talk in Washington, D.C. at the NIH, and one of the directors, named Michael Jang, he goes, I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm 60 years old. I know how to use AI. I know how to use all these algorithms. I know how to use all of these up-to-date retinal scans so that I can treat my patients in a personalized and tailored manner. But none of this is being taught in medical schools. None of it. They don't teach this stuff in medical schools. And he's talking about the general public for the United States. When you get down to specific ethnic groups, it gets worse. I was back in 2016. I went to a different DC meeting at the NIH with a Comanche doctor who had served in Vietnam, and he was 80 years old at the time. And he said, you know what? From Vietnam until now, nothing has changed for uh, Native American medical education. All the things that I brought up as a student back in the 60s are still problems today because nobody researches it or nobody teaches it in the medical schools. So my people, the Comanche, are getting hurt from the same old that we've always been hurt from, which is a lack of knowledge of Western doctors that serve Native patients.
And it's crazy because we recruit people to come work with us, to come be in our health facilities, but yet it seems like it appears that they're not advocating in the best way for us.
Yeah, and just for transparency's sake, I'm married into the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. I myself am Mexican. My group are called the Purepecha, and we are from a west central state in Mexico called Michoacan. And people don't know Mexico has 130 million people. 121 million people have native ancestry. 57 million people identify only as indigenous, regardless if they're mixed or not, that they still just hold their identity as indigenous people. And there's 62 indigenous language families spoken in Mexico across, 2,000 pueblos or so. And so, to your point earlier about them siloing us or us siloing ourselves and getting us to fight, in this DNA fight, since they can't really get it from American Indians or First Nations, they get it from undocumented migrants, and then they call it Native American. And me and my colleagues were in conversation back in must have been 2018 or so, with both Ancestry and with 23andMe and say, stop saying American Indian, stop saying Native American, because the data that you have and the references they're using are from Central America and South America. So you have to be honest about what you're talking about. You can say Indigenous American, but you can't say this is an Apache thing or this is a Lakota thing. You have to just be honest with the public that the data that you have is kind of this mishmash of people's DNA.
Do you find like just in this process of like trying to talk about this and bring awareness that the roadblocks that you face are intentional and
I
then
don't
how
I
they
don't I
subvert?
don't I don't think they're intentional. I think it's like what you were saying earlier. They've trained us into their system and we carry a lot of their biases that they've taught us, right? Um, During the 60s, it seemed like everybody, it didn't matter if they were black or Filipino or Chicano or whatever, they were all like, we are brown and black, we are not white, we are getting spat upon every day. We need our civil rights. We need to come together and fight together because we, each other, are not the enemy. It's colonialism and settlers that are the enemy, and we need to get our rights. But ever since then, things have all been broken down again, and people are fighting against each other. If you just look with the Navajo Nation right now, Chaco Canyon is not related to them, right? But Chaco Canyon is on their reservation. So all of these Pueblo tribes in Arizona and New Mexico want to say so on what happens with those sacred places. And Deb Haaland, who is not Navajo, she's Pueblo, when she was in the Biden administration, she made sure there was a 20-mile radius where you were not allowed to do any kind of digging, whether that's for mining like oil or for any other mineral or just prospecting for artifacts, whatever. It's a protected space. And ever since she did that, it's been a fight between all of the tribes about whose jurisdiction that is and who can make money off of the site, right? And there it doesn't seem to be any unity. I mean, just last week though, because of some stuff Trump is trying to do with general oil drilling in Arizona, I think tribes are starting to come together again. But for a while there, it was a big fight. It's like this we have to, as Native people, realize that we are not each other's enemy and that we are being put against each other with these things like, you know, massive immediate wealth from oil drilling, things like that, instead of protecting the things we need to protect.
been some movement to try to organize the Yrecheta shop going, but it's really hard because we're just there's just too much for us to like who's gonna control what or who's, that kind of thing. And like we have issues going on now with the Black Hills. Um, the mining, I see there's lithium, they're wanting to pull uranium and back to gold. And so it isn't like they already dug a big enough hole in Lead, South Dakota to mine gold. We gotta go and put more holes in the Black Hills to get any other gold that may be left there.
And it's hard because, people like myself and my company, our first goal and our first value is to protect tribal sovereignty, even if the tribe makes a decision that we don't agree with, right? That's hard. It's hard to say tribal sovereignty is the most important thing because if you start attacking tribal sovereignty from the inside, then you have nothing, right? When it's your turn on the chopping block for a foster child or protecting your cattle or whatever, if you don't have the tribe, as a court system protecting your back, you have nothing. So, tribal sovereignty has to be protected. But at the same time, tribes do make decisions that aren't good for people. And like I said, for this Chaco Canyon thing, that's exactly what was about to happen was they were going to say that Deb Haaland, in her role as head of the Bureau of Interior, had no right to go over Navajo tribal sovereignty and impose that ban for Chaco Canyon. And they were going to say we're going to assert our Navajo sovereignty and say we can drill anywhere we want, even if it's right in the middle of Chaco Canyon. So these are the tensions that we face, right?
And even just look within, like I was watching some stuff on TikTok out of the Navajo Nation, like they're up in arms with their own leadership. So people are upset that their leadership has sided over with Trump and is becoming a Trump ally or something like that. And so there's like a lot of stuff I've been watching in regards to that, like when our because our tribal governments too do that. They ignore the voice of the people, and then they themselves too, because it's a learned behavior, right? Like we learned how to profit. We want to profit for ourselves, so we're going to maybe create rules that we're going to benefit from our whatever. And so then we have the internal. So you might have external conflict, then you get internal conflict.
But I've been to places where things seem to go pretty well. We just recently came from Tulsa for the quarterly meeting of the five civilized tribes. And, they had people that were grassroots, they had people that had professional degrees, and they debated over 3 days about, major pieces of legislation and action that they were going to take together as five civilized tribes to protect Eastern Oklahoma. I used to live in Seattle, and I went to all the meetings, the quarterly meetings of ATNI, which is the Affiliated Tribes and Northwest Indians. Same thing. It was a whole week. Every day was the same sort of four topics: housing, education, healthcare, and the environment. And, they would go in and argue about stuff. At the end of the day, they would report out. And at the end of the week, they'd come out with a plan. And, it was a really good system of protecting everybody in the Northwest. So it was Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and Washington State. And they, at the time I was there, they were fighting over all of these trains that were coming from Canada loaded with coal that needed to make it to the Pacific Ocean, either through Portland or through Seattle and be sent to China, and going through reservations and polluting reservations because the United States would not impose regulation over the coal cars. So the coal cars were open and they were spreading coal dust everywhere into the water, into the air, all that kind of stuff. And so the tribes decided that they were going to oppose any trains moving through their lands except for one reservation. And they said, our relatives and that reservation, this is the only way they can make money. This is the only way they could put food on the table. For the rest of us, we have fishing, we have a casino, we have other kinds of things that we do. We make money. We can afford to ban this. But we as a group, even though we're different tribes, different jurisdictions, we as a group are not going to talk bad about our relatives if they want to take this deal with the coal company, because that's the only way they could put food on the table. I'm like, that's amazing. That's the way it should be done.
Yeah. Great Plains, we just have the, what is it called? The Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Board or whatever. That's what the tribal chairman's goal. None of that comes back to the people. Decisions get made. And oftentimes the people are sold out. That's how ours go here. We don't have that collective, and we want it. We want to get along. Like, I think grassroots people get along, and they organize to oppose a lot of the things that even the tribal governments want to do. And so like I think we're missing that. And sometimes people will say, oh, that's because they're Sioux people, or they're Lakota and Dakota, and they like to fight. But that's not it. It's just like we'd like to be included, like there should be, like we should be thinking about our children and grandchildren and people who haven't come yet. And what are we leaving them?
Yeah,
This is,
they're in these two examples. I mean, there are fights. They're just organized, right? And they're kept secret. So like, um, both for the five civilized tribes and for the Northwest Indians, it's done at a tribal casino. You can only get there by registering them and them, basically making sure you're the right kind of people and you're not going to come in there and, tell people secrets or whatever. And then the decisions that they make together doesn't mean that they've solved all the problems. It just means any continuing fights are tabled to the next quarterly meeting. And as you said, these meetings are open to the community, so the community can come. So for ATNI, it's a week long, and you can either come to the meeting every day, or you can get a hotel room at the casino, whatever you need to do, and be there and interact with tribal leadership. Same thing with the Tulsa meeting. They move that meeting around because the five tribes are all over Oklahoma. But again, if you're a community member, you can come to many of the open sessions where they're discussing things.
really, I don't know. We're in a very tough time. I was talking about that before you came on, talking about censorship and talking about like how we don't know and like how it starts. Like we don't even know things are happening, and so we think everything's hunky dory. And then somehow you find out that something, like it isn't hunky dory, and then we might be like sitting there saying, "Well, when did this happen?" How did who knew about this or whatever? And so I was talking about the example was they're in full protest in LA and Portland and in New York. We don't see any of it. There's hundreds of thousands of people on the street protesting ICE and their detention centers. We don't see it. I watched a video of a preacher or a minister get beat up by ICE. He got taken down and they really did him in, but he was there protesting, and it's peaceful protests. Like the protesters aren't fighting back or anything like that. They're being peaceful about it. They're on the streets. They have their signs. They have their bullhorns. They're making noise. They're doing all of those things. And you have the LAPD just coming in, helping ICE and just doing their people in. And the same thing in New York. I watched a video where they were organized and they were talking, and then the cop had his bullhorn and he said, "You get off the streets or we're gonna arrest you." And they were still, organized and they were still talking and it was peaceful. And then he said, "All right, boys." That's exactly what he said. "All right, boys." They just started arresting people and all of that. And so if you don't know, you don't know. Like, because this is not on our regular TV, and people often, just turn the TV on to watch the news. And so if the news is just telling you it's gonna be sunny out or it's gonna get windy, you don't even know that the whole world, the world is on fire and we're all just sitting in our houses all hunky dory.
Yeah, and I don't know who watches your program, but I'm so happy and want to take the opportunity to thank those organizations that have been having these anti-ICE protests on behalf of my people from Central America, right? The Indian Collective with Nick Tilson, Nick Estes from Lower Brule and his Red Nations Collective down in Albuquerque. They've all been putting all over social media protect our relatives from Central America. So I'm very happy that that's all happening, and we are being recognized as an Indigenous people, and but we're all sort of victims to this sort of brainwashing, and I'm not defending those Mexicans who have anti-Indigenous sort of feelings or sentiments because I know they exist. But a lot of that's not their fault. I mean, there's been probably 300 more years that we've been suffering under this sort of colonial brainwashing where being indigenous, like everybody says in the United States, being black is at the bottom of the social ladder. And I'm like, not in most of the Americas. And most of the Americas being Indian is at the bottom of the social ladder. And so it's still not very popular to be Indian in Mexico. So my group in the 2000, um, in the 2000 census, they were counted at 500,000 people. In the 2010 census, they were counted at 250,000 people. In the most recent census, they're counted as 100,000 people. And every year it gets smaller, not because they're disappearing or they're going anywhere. They just don't identify as Indigenous people because there's no social capital. There's no benefit to identifying that way. It's better to identify as a mixed person, and then you might get a job or you might avoid going to jail or whatever. So in most of Central America, because of the United States and the Reagan wars that started, back in the 80s, in indigeneity in Central America and most of Latin America is going away because if you claim to be indigenous, you get killed. You get shot with a machine gun.
Yeah, even here.
Yeah, yeah.
We think that we've come so far, but yet we have not. And that gets pretty sad. Like sometimes, I'm a very optimistic person. Like I always think, I look at, the bad things, but I'm always trying to find the good things, like where can we go? What can we learn from it? What's, all of this stuff. And some days I'll crash and I cannot find one good thing to say, to think, to anything. And I'm just doom and gloom, it's just, and it's really hard. And I'll have to just, then I know I need to sit, just get away, sit by myself, meditate and try to figure it out and get myself back because I'm a very optimistic person. I don't like to be negative Nancy or pessimistic Penny or be like that. And so even this conversation with you, I think about, wow, there is so much going on. We have our own people doing so much work with biodata, like so much work in what are we doing with our data? Who is protecting our data? And I get really inspired by that and impressed. I'll be sad for a little bit because I think, man, nobody knows these guys are doing all this work or nobody's listening to them. And so like then I think, well, what can I do to help? What can I do? And then, try to do it that way and stuff. But yeah, I'm really impressed with your guys' work, the things that you're doing. Um, one of the things was I was like, I think you talked about this before in your first interview, but what is it? What is it that, why are they so interested in our DNA?
Well, that's hard to talk about because I'm biased, of course. I don't know how you feel. I don't know how you feel about your people, but I feel about my people and natives in general is we are special. We are unique. We are strong. We are different from the rest of the world. You know, we're different from Europe, Asia, and Africa. We're just different. Um, so I believe that the way we have adapted to the land and to the microbes and to the plants and the water and each other is different than what happened over there. Um, Whether or not that's, beneficial or something that people can turn into money, that's a different question. And so that's the other side of this question. I think that um, as soon as they mapped the human genome in 2003, everybody right away said science is no longer science for curiosity's sake or for the elevation of human knowledge. Science is now commercial. It is all capital. Everything is commodifiable. Everything is sellable. And that really reflected in a lot of different laws, like in 1980 with the Bayh-Dole Act, where it said research can only be funded if it's commercially applicable. The patents and the licenses can be owned by the university, so not even the researcher. So that's the problem when researchers come to reservations, they lie basically, not on purpose, but because they don't know. They say, I can do this and I can do that for you and I can protect this and we're going to honor these agreements. No, because it's already been decided in 1980. The relationship is between the federal funder, which they own everything, and they allow universities to have the license and patents. And then the patents go to the university, not the individual researcher. So I can be a researcher at a university, I can discover the cure to cancer. I won't own it. The university owns it. And that's the problem is people don't know all of this long history of laws that basically disenfranchise everybody and put, the powerful players that were always powerful in control of these things. And so, in terms of DNA, a lot of it is speculation. So, since 1980, there's been the American Competes Act, and they all talk about ownership of data. It's weird because it's a weird conversation. They talk about open data, meaning any corporation can use it, but then the data ownership belongs to the university, and they're the ones that get to license it or control it or do, make agreements over it. And then now, because starting in 2022, they've been really worried about China and Iran and Russia. So now all of the data belongs to the United States collectively, and they don't want to share any data. Like it's been a really, really confusing and complicated sort of discussion about who owns the data, who can make money off the data, and all that kind of stuff. But it's because it's all a speculative market. So if you've been following from the 80s until now, this whole thing about privatization and business does things better has moved into the research space and the academic space where it's not really uh, back in the day when you had a patent, you had to develop it before you can patent it. Now it's first to file. So you just have to have the glimmering of an idea to say it belongs to you. And that's how it is with this. Like people have a glimmer of an idea that they're going to find something in you and me, and then they want to own it. So that this whole speculative market, there's like no basis in fact. Again, it goes into this economy of snake oil and charlatans doing business and saying, I have something when they don't really have it, and then trying to sell it to somebody else before they figure it out.
Yeah, that's seems like the bottom line, right? Like the capitalist thoughts, like who's going to benefit, who's going to make the money, who's going to do all of that. And then we're all openly, okay, we'll participate. And then you don't realize that because of your participation that this has happened. Or one of the things that we're up on our hour, but I just wanted to say this one thing or get your feedback on this. So I've just like watched this short video, And it's like all these different Native Americans or American Indians or, indigenous people throughout the continent, from Greenland all the way down to South America. And they're all like somehow through the conversation of DNA, but then, they're like making these arguments that they're saying we did cross the Bering Straits. We did, we may not be, like born of this land or, making statements like that. And then they say, but all people are migratory. So we're all migratory. So then they'll say like the European people are migratory as well. So they're not even indigenous to that place. And so then they start talking, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, why are we talking like this? What are we doing? I don't know if you've heard any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, it's like some dicey ground there. I think especially, for places where indigenous people are really mixed and they have a low blood quantum, people want to make those arguments, right? And so at least in the United States and Canada, they're like there are other things other than blood that ties you to place, culture, kinship, relation to the land. And I think those are all good. But yeah, there's been this movement, especially with the Jewish-Palestinian conflict, at least since the early 90s, where Jewish scholars have been saying nobody's indigenous anymore. Like we're all just one big human family, and that's true. But that doesn't mean that we all get treated the same, right? It doesn't mean that we all don't have or we shouldn't seek specific control of our own lives, right? And so they've been doing this chopping up of our language and using it against us, right? So they're like, I'm Jewish, but I'm not indigenous to Israel anymore. You're native, you're not really indigenous to here anymore. Blah blah blah. You have individual rights instead of collective rights. Like all of these arguments are being used against us, and I'm like, no. First of all, there is restoration that never happened for Native people that still needs to happen, right? Somehow we are the poorest and the least talked about, and in some ways the most demonized people on the planet. But at the same time, at least through DNA and our water and our plant medicines, we are the most valuable. So, like, how do those things match up? If we are the worst people on the planet, but we're the most valuable people on the planet, then of course we're indigenous. Of course we are a collective because they see us as a collective and we should be fighting for our rights to exist and our rights not to be sick.
Yeah, I think I like how you said that. I like how it's going to give me something to think about this week, anyways. A lot to ponder. Anyways, for those of you that joined, this is Joseph Yrecheta. Hold on, my granddaughter's. Yeah. So, Joseph Yrecheta, he joined us from the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation, where he is a part of the Native Biodata Consortium. He's a founder of that. And we'll hope that he'll join us again and we can carry on these kind of conversations about what we do as Native people in controlling our data. So thank you for joining us, Joseph. You have any closing comments?
Yeah, and I just, again, you've said so many great things throughout the hour, and I just wanted to come back to them, which is we can't do this alone, right? We can't live in these silos. And of course, me and my company don't do it alone. We are part of a huge network, the U.S. Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network. We're part of the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. We're part of Local Context Org, which tries to protect data through watermarking and putting marks on data. We're part of the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba. We're we're just part of all of these very, very large groups that have been working since the 90s on this topic. And it's seen, and I put some stuff in your inbox and also on LinkedIn of all of these people that are writing about Indigenous data sovereignty. It could be water, it could be language, it could be the environment, it could be animals, it could be humans. There's a whole bunch of them that are out there, and the papers that have been coming out this last year are coming out fast and furious. So go look for those papers.
Thank you. And we will keep in touch, Joseph. You guys have a great rest of your week. We will see you next week on Toksa Hour. Be blessed, stay cool or warm. I don't